Tokyo, 1945. The first thing they heard was screaming, not from the city above but from under their boots, a rising animal sound trapped in concrete and ash that made even trained soldiers freeze in the smoke-filled corridor. Private Joe Harlow's boot hit a weak spot in the charred school basement, and the cracked floor gave way with a dry roar, dropping him waist-deep into blackness. His rifle clattered as a dozen pale hands shot up from the darkness below, clawing at him, not to pull him down but to push him away, fingers trembling, nails broken, voices shrieking in Japanese and Korean, a chorus of terror that sounded like people already convinced they were about to die badly. The air under the floor smelled wrong. Not just dust and mold, but old blood, disinfectant, burned paper, something bitter and metallic that clung to the tongue. Harlow's squad yanked him back up, coughing, while their lieutenant shouted for light. One of the engineers hurried over with a lantern, lowering it carefully into the jagged hole. The beam fell across faces first, young women pressed against a concrete wall, eyes blown wide, cheeks streaked with dirt and old tears. Their hair was matted, their kimonos and dresses were torn and stained. They flinched from the light as if it burned. Someone down there repeated the same phrase over and over, voice breaking, as if reciting a sentence she had been told her whole life. "They'll use us and then kill us, they'll use us and then kill us." Lieutenant Carter swore under his breath. This was supposed to be a simple sweep, another burned-out corner of Tokyo where Japanese officers might be hiding or destroying records. Major William F. Marquardt had sent them with clear orders: find any remaining bunkers, secure documents, report anything unusual. But no one had mentioned a room full of women buried beneath a ruined school, locked away like trash the war had forgotten to incinerate. "Easy," Carter called down, hands raised, voice steady. "We're not here to hurt you." It meant nothing to them. His Japanese was broken, and their trust in uniforms had been ground into dust long before the surrender. One woman in particular stared up at them, not with pleading fear but with a hard, flat look that felt older than the bombed city above. Her name, they would later learn, was Aiko Nishida. In that moment, she was just another face in the darkness, jaw clenched, eyes not asking for mercy but calculating something. The engineers widened the hole, clearing rubble until a rough opening appeared, large enough for a man to slide through. Harlow dropped to his knees, heart pounding, and swung his legs into the gap. He told himself he was just following orders, but his palms were slick with sweat anyway. He descended slowly, one boot finding a foothold in a crack in the concrete, the other searching for purchase. The lantern's beam bobbed beside him, throwing wild shadows that made every movement down there twitch with menace. When his boots finally hit the bunker floor, the noise exploded. The women shrank back, clutching each other, a knot of shaking bodies. Aiko did not move with them. She remained where she was, near an iron cot bolted to the wall, shoulders squared. In the dim light, Harlow saw the swell of old bruises fading yellow along her forearm, the thinness of her wrist, the way she watched his hands like a soldier tracks a rifle's barrel. He slowly unclipped the canteen from his belt and held it out, both hands visible, fingers open. "It's water," he said quietly, as if tone alone could cross the language barrier. "Mizu. Just water." Her eyes flicked to the canteen, then back to his face, searching for the catch. For years, every outstretched hand had meant the same thing. Her body knew the pattern even when her mind was too tired to protest. Something in her snapped at the familiarity of that gesture. Her hand darted behind her to the cot, fingers closing around the cold handle of a rusted metal tool left by some long-gone maintenance worker. In one motion she stepped forward and slashed upward. Harlow saw the flash of metal too late. Pain tore across his forearm, hot and bright, and he hissed, stumbling back. His rifle strap slipped from his shoulder. Carter shouted from above, and the squad reacted on instinct, rifles snapping to the hole, safety catches clicking. The women screamed louder, certain now that the violence they'd been promised had finally arrived. "Hold your fire!" Carter's voice cracked with the effort. "Hold it, damn it!" Harlow pressed his bleeding arm against his jacket, breathing hard, eyes locked on Aiko. She stood frozen, chest heaving, the makeshift blade still in her hand but trembling now. She had struck first, expecting what always came after. Every muscle in her body braced for the inevitable fist, boot, or bullet. It didn't come. Very slowly, Harlow bent down, picked up his canteen with his good hand, and set it on the floor between them. Then he stepped back. 1 step. 2. He raised both hands, palms out, as if facing a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden move. The cut on his arm dripped onto the concrete, dark drops spreading in irregular circles. The soldier who had every excuse to lash out did nothing. He just breathed, steady and deliberate, letting the silence fill the bunker. Aiko's brow furrowed. She glanced at the canteen, at the blood, back to his face. This was wrong. Men did not back away. Men did not offer and then retreat. Her fingers tightened around the tool's handle until her knuckles blanched, but she did not strike again. Confusion dug deeper than fear, twisting in her chest. Boots thudded on the broken stairwell as another figure dropped into the bunker. This man carried no rifle. His uniform was neater, his shoulders more rigid, a leather map case hanging at his side. Major William F. Marquardt took in the scene with one quick sweep: the wounded private, the shaking women, the rusted beds, the faint chemical stink coming from a small furnace in the corner. His jaw tightened when he saw the furnace door still warm, thin wisps of smoke curling from its edge. "What the hell were they burning?" he muttered. Carter joined him, handing over a small bundle of half-charred pages pulled from a bin upstairs. Marquardt unfolded the top one carefully. The Japanese characters were smeared and eaten by flame, but not enough to hide what they were: lists. Names. Ages. Dates. Locations. The header, barely legible, made his stomach drop. He looked back at the women, at their torn clothes, their hollow eyes, the way they flinched from every motion of his hands. Pieces clicked into place with a sickening inevitability. Comfort stations. Evidence disposal. Human beings treated as files to be burned along with the paper. Marquardt straightened and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the bunker to hear, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "New order," he said. "No one touches these women. No one harms them. They are under our protection. Anyone disobeys, they answer to me." The translator repeated his words in halting Japanese. Most of the women stared without comprehension, but a few caught enough. Aiko heard only fragments. "No touch, protection under our watch," but it was enough to create a crack in the solid wall of certainty she had carried into this room. It didn't mean she trusted them. It just meant, for the first time in years, she didn't fully understand the danger. Above them, the ruined city groaned as wind moved through broken glass and twisted steel. Below, in the bunker that was never meant to be found, a furnace still radiated the last heat of documents meant to erase them from history. Marquardt turned, eyes narrowing at a narrow dark passage branching off from the main room, half collapsed, smelling of fresh dust. "Sir," Carter said quietly, following his gaze. "We thought this was the only chamber." Marquardt shook his head slowly. "No. Someone built a second way out. Or a second way in." He stared into the dark, where the light did not reach. "And whoever used it knew exactly what they were hiding down here." The wind outside the shattered school moaned through broken beams as the sun dipped behind the ruins of Tokyo, turning the bombed horizon into jagged silhouettes. The women were brought out one by one, blinking at the faint daylight as though they had never seen it. Some covered their faces, not from shame but from disbelief that the sky still existed. Aiko walked last, refusing the steadying hand that Private Harlow offered despite his bandaged arm. Her body remained taut, every step prepared for a blow that did not come. She scanned each soldier, memorizing their faces the way a prisoner memorizes guard rotations, always calculating, always braced for the shift from calm to violence. Major Marquardt watched silently, arms crossed, his jaw hardened by what they had found. He ordered tarps to be set up against a partially standing wall, creating a temporary shelter until medics arrived. What haunted him most was the furnace. The list he held in his pocket had only survived because it had fallen just short of the flame's reach. He turned it over now, walking toward the women, his boots crunching on glass. As the translator repeated his question, he saw their heads dip, shoulders curling inward as if expecting interrogation to lead back to pain. Only Aiko raised her eyes. She looked directly at him, then at the paper he held, and for the first time since being dragged from the bunker, her expression shifted, not softening, but sharpening. Recognition. She mouthed something, lips barely moving. Marquardt crouched in front of her. You know this list. His voice was low, controlled. She hesitated, then nodded once. Slowly. Carefully. As though movement itself might trigger punishment. Before she could speak, a soft voice cut in. Dr. Keiko Tamura approached, her hair pinned neatly under a cloth cap, her satchel slung over one shoulder. She was small, but her presence carried weight, partly because she spoke fluent Japanese, partly because she had spent the last 3 years documenting the system no one wanted to admit existed. Her eyes swept over the women, taking in the malnutrition, the bruises, the hollow cheeks. Let me try, she said quietly. The translator stepped back, relieved. Keiko knelt beside Aiko, leaving a respectful distance. She introduced herself, her tone gentle but firm, the manner of someone who had learned how to coax information from those taught to fear their own voices. Aiko looked at her with suspicion, then with a flicker of something that resembled caution rather than dread. A woman speaking her language was irregular enough. But a Japanese woman wearing an American armband, that was something she did not know how to interpret. Keiko spoke softly, explaining what the Americans were doing, that they were hunting the officers who ran comfort stations, not the women. She took out her notebook and gently set it down in front of Aiko, not pushing it toward her, just placing it where she could reach if she wished. Aiko's fingers twitched. Her gaze dropped to the notebook, then lifted to Keiko's face. The disbelief there was raw, almost painful to look at. She said one word, quiet as a breath. Nays? Why? It was the first word she had spoken outside the bunker. Keiko inhaled slowly. Because the truth matters. Even now. Aiko studied her for a long time. The other women huddled under the tarp, watching, as if Aiko were risking something on their behalf. Finally she nodded, a small, jerking motion, and reached toward Marquardt's half-burned document. Her hand hovered above it, trembling. When she touched the edge, her breath hitched. She traced one name, then another, her finger lingering on one written in a heavier, darker ink. Moria, she whispered. Marquardt exchanged a glance with Carter. Colonel Moria. The man whose brutality had come up again and again in testimonies gathered across the Pacific, commanding officers, military police, even captured Japanese soldiers mentioned him with dread. The man whose name had never appeared on any official roster. Keiko took a careful breath. You know him? Aiko's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper, a cold memory rising like a tide. She nodded. He oversaw. Her fingers pressed into her knees. The scars on her arms stood out in the fading light. Keiko did not press further. Instead, she asked, the furnace, were they burning records? Aiko hesitated. Her throat worked. Finally, she nodded again. 2 officers. They said Americans were coming. That they must erase everything. She swallowed hard. Everyone. Marquardt leaned forward. Everyone? Aiko's gaze flicked to the women under the tarp. Silent. Waiting. Understanding what had almost been done to them. She nodded a third time, her jaw tightening so hard the muscle twitched. A chill moved through the soldiers nearby. Marquardt rose, eyes narrowing, scanning the rubble around them. If the officers planned to burn documents and witnesses, they had either fled or were still somewhere underground. He turned to Carter. Get the rest of the engineers. That tunnel runs deeper than we thought. Carter jogged off, shouting orders. Keiko helped Aiko to her feet, but she stood on her own, wavering only slightly from exhaustion. Aiko pointed toward a collapsed corner of the school grounds. Her voice was strained but clear enough. There is another way. A second passage. They used it when the raids grew close. Harlow approached, cradling his wounded arm. He kept a careful distance. He met Aiko's gaze with something like respect, not pity, not fear, but the recognition that she had survived things he could hardly imagine. Keiko guided Aiko to a crate where she could sit. Aiko lowered herself stiffly, as though unused to resting. When Keiko offered her a small tin cup of water, Aiko hesitated, staring at it as if it were a trick. But she accepted. She took a sip. Then another. Real water. Not what they rationed to the women in the bunker. Not what they mixed with bitterness to keep them weak. Marquardt returned with 2 engineers and knelt to speak to Aiko again, this time choosing his words carefully. "This second passage," he said. "Where does it go?" Aiko closed her eyes, trying to summon a memory buried under trauma and terror. When she spoke, her voice was thin. "To a building behind the school. An old storage house. They used it at night. To bring in men. To take girls out." That hit harder than gunfire. Even the soldiers shifted uncomfortably at the blunt truth. Marquardt nodded grimly. "We'll search it." But Aiko wasn't finished. Her hand rose shakily. "They said more officers? Trying to escape. South route. Toward the mountains." She pointed to the horizon. "If you go now, you can still catch them." Marquardt stared at her for a long moment, something sharpening behind his eyes, not anger, but resolve. "We will." Aiko watched him turn to give orders, watched soldiers move with purpose, watched Carter assemble a pursuit team, watched Harlow adjust his rifle strap with his bandaged hand. None of them looked at her like a burden. None of them demanded anything from her. She looked down at the half-burned document in Marquardt's hand, the names that had been meant to vanish forever. For the first time since she had been dragged into the bunker months ago, she felt the smallest shift inside her, not trust, not hope, but the dangerous, fragile idea that maybe not every uniform meant cruelty. Night settled over Tokyo like a bruise, deep purple and heavy, pressing against the shattered skyline. The pursuit team moved quickly, guided by Aiko's halting directions and the narrow clues found in the burned papers. Major Marquardt rode in the front jeep with Carter beside him, while Harlow sat in the back, his wounded arms stiff against his chest. The streets were a maze of broken stones and twisted metal, the remnants of a city that had burned for nights without end. Fires still flickered in distant blocks as if Tokyo itself refused to sleep. The convoy halted near an abandoned tram tunnel, its entrance half collapsed, rusted tracks disappearing into darkness. Aiko had spoken of it hesitantly, describing officers slipping through this area at night, always in small groups, always silent. The place smelled faintly of smoke drifting from the north where neighborhoods still smoldered. Marquardt stepped out first, scanning the shadows. "Light's minimal," he whispered. "We don't spook them." Carter signaled the soldiers to spread out. 2 engineers knelt beside the collapsed tunnel entrance, pushing rubble aside, revealing a narrow passage just big enough for a man to crawl through. Fresh footprints, some deep, some hurried, were visible in the ash around the opening. Carter crouched and touched them. "They came through recently," he murmured. Marquardt nodded. "Then they're still somewhere ahead. Or they left something behind." The team split, with 2 soldiers entering the tunnel, while the others swept the surrounding structures. The air inside the tunnel was cold and stale, heavy with dust. Drips of water echoed, and rats scurried deeper into the dark. The soldiers advanced slowly, rifles raised, lamps covered to minimize glow. They moved past rusted cable boxes and twisted debris until the tunnel widened into a small chamber. There was a body slumped against a concrete pillar. The soldier closest froze, raising his lamp. The corpse was dressed in a Japanese officer's uniform, though the insignia had been torn away. His throat had been cut cleanly. On the floor beside him were torn pages from a ledger, their edges blackened as if he had tried, and failed, to burn them. Harlow swore under his breath, stepping closer to inspect, his stomach tightening. "He didn't do this himself." "No," Marquardt said quietly when he arrived. "They're silencing loose ends." He knelt beside the corpse, lifting one of the half-burned pages. It listed girls' names, ages, transport locations. Beside several names, someone had drawn a red line. The meaning was obvious. Those were the ones who hadn't survived long enough to be moved. Marquardt folded the papers carefully. This is enough to tie Moria to multiple stations. Harlow's jaw clenched. If we can find him. Marquardt's eyes hardened. We will. The team moved deeper into the tunnel until a faint sound reached them. Hurried footsteps, the scrape of boots, and the distant echo of voices. Carter signaled silence. The soldiers pressed themselves against the walls, listening. Voices in Japanese, sharp and urgent, drifted toward them. They'll hang us if the Americans catch us. Moria promised safe passage. The records must be gone, if anyone finds them. A figure emerged from around the bend, a younger Japanese soldier carrying a stack of documents. He froze at the sight of the Americans. His eyes went wide. He spun to run. Stop! Carter shouted. The man bolted. Harlow fired a warning shot. It ricocheted off the tunnel wall, sparking in the dark. The man stumbled but kept running. Carter sprinted after him, boots pounding on the metal tracks. The chase twisted through the tunnel, breath echoing off concrete until Carter lunged and tackled him hard. They hit the ground, dust rising in a thick cloud. The young soldier struggled like a trapped animal, screaming until Carter pinned him, panting. Marquardt arrived seconds later, his voice low but cold. If he destroys those papers, we'll never find the others. He nodded to Harlow. Help me. They pried the documents from the soldier's grip. Marquardt flipped through them quickly, transport orders, coded communications, handwritten notes. Everything that the officers had risked their lives to hide. Where are the others? Marquardt demanded. The young soldier clenched his jaw, trembling. They'll kill me, he whispered. Moria said anyone who talks. Moria won't protect you anymore, Marquardt said sharply. He's protecting himself. The young soldier's eyes flickered. A tiny fracture of doubt. He went south. Toward the Tama foothills. A safe house near the river crossing. How many with him? Carter pressed. 5, maybe 6. They killed 2 already. They said fewer mouths, fewer risks. Marquardt's breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. We're done here. Move. They dragged the soldier up and marched him back toward the entrance. But when they emerged outside, Aiko was there, waiting beneath the tarp. The medics had given her water and a blanket, but she still looked fragile as a shadow, barely anchored to the world. She saw the trembling soldier and stopped breathing. Recognition struck like a blow. He had been one of the guards at the station. She remembered his voice, his laughter with the other men, the way he stood in the doorway without looking at the girls directly, as if they were not people at all. The young man dropped his gaze, terrified, not of Marquardt, but of her. Aiko took one slow step forward. The movement silenced everyone. Even the wind seemed to pause. Her eyes were sharp, but not vicious. She was not looking for revenge. She was looking for truth. She spoke in a hoarse whisper. Moria, where is he? The young soldier swallowed hard, shaking. The foothills, he whispered. He left yesterday. If you go in the morning, he'll be gone. Aiko's breath trembled. She closed her eyes. Then she opened them again, and Marquardt saw something steady there, determination where only fear had lived before. She pointed south. Marquardt nodded at his men. We leave before dawn. Behind them, the tunnel loomed with the ghosts of the dead. Before them, the path to the foothills opened like a wound waiting to be cauterized. Aiko wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, her face pale but set. For the first time, she was not just a witness. She was a guide. And she intended to see this through. Dawn broke over Tokyo in a pale, washed-out light, the kind that made ruins look older and wounds look deeper. The foothills south of the city rose in muted blues and grays, smoke clinging to their ridges like ghosts reluctant to leave. Major Marquardt's convoy moved before the sun fully breached the horizon, engines low, headlights off, wheels crunching over gravel and broken brick. The air was sharp with morning chill, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant fires. Aiko sat in the back of the second jeep, wrapped in a military blanket, eyes fixed on the horizon. She had slept barely an hour, but she had insisted on coming. Not out of vengeance, she did not believe in that anymore. She came because she understood that truth was a flame, easily snuffed out, easily ignored, but blinding when allowed to burn. Marquardt rode up front, scanning the ridgeline through binoculars. He didn't trust the quiet. Too many officers had vanished in these hills since the surrender, like smoke slipping through fingers. Carter checked the magazine on his rifle for the fourth time while Harlow, gripping his bandaged arm, kept an eye on the road behind them, watching for any tail. They weren't expecting a firefight. They were expecting a cornered animal. By the time they reached the old storage house Aiko had described, the sun hovered just above the hills, lighting the battered structure in soft gold. Ivy strangled half the wall. The other half was blackened from past flames. The place looked abandoned except for one detail: fresh boot prints in the dirt behind the building, leading down toward a grove of twisted trees. Marquardt halted the team with a raised fist. "Weapons ready, but no shooting unless absolutely necessary. If Moria's alive, he talks." They advanced in a line, footsteps muffled by wet leaves. Aiko stayed behind one of the medics but moved with surprising steadiness, each step measured. As they approached the grove, a faint sound reached them, voices, low and urgent. Carter peered around a crooked tree. 3 Japanese officers stood near a half-dug pit, shoveling ashes and charred papers into the dirt. Another stood guard a few feet away, rifle trembling in his hands. A 5th man knelt beside a wooden crate, striking a match again and again, trying to coax a flame from damp kindling. But it was the 6th figure who made Marquardt tense. Colonel Moria. His uniform was disheveled, but he still carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who believed the war had simply paused, not ended. His face was a mask, calm, calculating, cold. As Marquardt stepped closer, Moria's gaze flicked toward the sound. The shovelers faltered. The guards swallowed. Moria said nothing, only stood slowly, brushing soil from his hands with meticulous composure. Marquardt stepped into the clearing, rifle lowered but ready. "Colonel Moria," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "By authority of the Supreme Allied Command, you're under arrest." Moria's lip twitched, not quite a smile. "America has won your victory," he said in crisp English. "But you will not win your narrative. The world does not need to know what happened here." Harlow muttered. "The hell it doesn't." The guard panicked and swung his rifle toward the Americans, finger trembling on the trigger. Carter fired before he could, a single precise shot. The guard collapsed, weapon clattering from nervous hands even as he fell. The other officers froze, staring at their fallen comrade, then at the Americans, then at Moria as if waiting for him to unleash some final command. Moria didn't move. He kept his eyes on Marquardt. "You think you understand what we protected? These girls." He shook his head. "They were resources. They served their empire." Aiko stepped forward. She shouldn't have. Carter reached out to stop her, but she ignored him, her small frame emerging into plain view. The officers gasped. Moria's eyes widened slightly, just enough to betray recognition. He stared at her. "You," he said softly. "I thought you were burned with the rest." Aiko met his gaze, trembling but unbroken. "You thought wrong." He tilted his head, studying her with disturbing curiosity. "You were always too defiant. I warned them that letting you live would cause problems." Aiko felt her pulse roaring in her ears. Old memories clawed at her, dark rooms, hands grabbing, the furnace heat, the unending cycle. But instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. "You erased names," she said, her voice shaking. "But not mine," Moria scoffed. "Names are irrelevant. The Empire needed victory. We provided what was required. That is why you're burying the evidence." Aiko countered, pointing to the half-dug pit. "Why you killed your own men?" Moria's jaw tightened. The officers behind him shifted nervously. One dropped his shovel. Another took a hesitant step backward. Marquardt raised his voice. Enough. Colonel, surrender peacefully, and your men may live to stand trial. Moria glanced at the officers around him. For a moment, the facade cracked. He saw fear in their faces, saw the resolve in the Americans, saw Iko, no longer broken, no longer silent. His empire had fallen. His lies had unraveled. He reached for his pistol. But he didn't draw it. Iko spoke again, barely above a whisper, but with enough force to freeze everyone in place. If you die now, your truth dies with you. You wanted control. Face what you've done. The words struck deeper than any bullet. Moria's hand hovered by the pistol, shaking ever so slightly. Then, in a jerking motion, he lowered it. His knees buckled. He sat on the ground as though his legs had forgotten their purpose. Take me, then, he murmured. But the world will misinterpret everything. Marquardt stepped forward. No, he said. The world will see everything. They disarmed the remaining officers without resistance. Some wept. Some stared blankly. Moria let the soldiers bind his wrists, his face empty of emotion, hollowed out. As they escorted the prisoners back toward the jeeps, Iko lingered near the pit. Inside were the remnants of records, burned diaries, transport logs, lists of girls who had vanished long before liberation. She crouched and touched the cold ashes, letting them run through her fingers like sand. Evidence meant to disappear forever. Harlow approached quietly. We'll retrieve everything, he said softly. Nothing's getting lost again. Iko nodded but didn't look up. The sun warmed her shoulders for the first time in months. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of earth and ash and morning air. For the first time since her capture, she was no longer waiting for someone to hurt her. She was watching justice begin.